You see, the most extraordinary things in life don't often announce themselves with trumpets or neon signs. They arrive softly in moments that seem almost ordinary, even forgettable. And yet, these are the very spaces where God does His deepest work. When you were waiting, doubting, wondering if you'd missed your moment, that was the moment being shaped for you. We tend to think that if nothing is happening, then nothing is working. But have you noticed that the seed doesn't sprout while you're watching? That the stars don't shift with the sound of applause? There is a quiet rhythm beneath all things, a stillness that moves mountains while we're asleep. And that's where you've been deep in the silence of divine construction. Now, let's be honest. That silence wasn't always peaceful, was it? Sometimes it felt like abandonment, like you were crying out into a void so vast, your own voice came echoing back as if mocking your hope. You asked, pleaded even, why am I not further along by now? Why hasn't it happened yet? And all you heard was stillness. But listen closely, because that stillness was not a denial. It was an answer, just not the one you were expecting. It was God saying, wait, not because you're unworthy, but because what's coming must meet you whole. You weren't just being held back, you were being held together. What we call delay is often just divine patience. What we call stagnation is sometimes sacred gestation. You weren't being punished, you were being prepared. And the pain that accompanied it, that wasn't random either. It was pressing you inward into places of yourself you hadn't yet known. The stillness made you listen. The waiting made you seek. The loss made you soften. And the softening, as strange as it sounds, was strength in disguise. We live in a world that applauds constant motion, productivity, noise, the chase. But God doesn't perform for crowds, He carves in secret. He shapes the vessel before pouring anything in. And the longer He shapes, the more precious the contents must be. So of course it felt like nothing was happening. You were being hidden like a treasure beneath the soil. And why? Because to be chosen by God isn't to be launched like a firework. It's to be rooted like an oak. Something meant to last, not just impress. You don't rush the blooming of a flower meant to outlive the season. And you don't rush a soul being tuned to carry divine resonance. And maybe that's why it took this long. Maybe that's why the door didn't open when you first knocked. You were still carrying stories that weren't yours. You were still trying to prove yourself to a world that couldn't see you clearly. But that's the beauty of the divine. It waits for your masks to fall, not because it needs you perfect, but because it wants you true. And now the air is shifting, isn't it? You can't quite explain it, but something in you knows the silence wasn't empty. It was sacred. The ache wasn't pointless. It was prophetic. Because the version of you standing here today wouldn't have survived the blessing had it come too early. But now you're ready, not to chase it, but to receive it. And when it comes, you won't need to shout. You'll simply smile. Because you'll recognize the fingerprints of the one who never left, even when it felt like He was nowhere to be found. And you'll understand in a way no words could ever fully express that what felt like a long pause was actually perfect timing. Because the universe is in no rush. And neither is God. But when He moves exactly when you're finally able to carry what was always yours. And now it begins. Ask ChatGPT, you said. Expand key point 2 into a 650 words segment that flows naturally within the overall speech and aligns seamlessly with the other key points. Keep the tone conversational, avoiding any heading. You said expand key point 3 into a 650 word segment that flows naturally within the overall speech and aligns seamlessly with the other key points. Keep the tone conversational, avoiding any headings. Conclude with a strong, concise closing line for impact and write it as though Alan Watts himself is delivering it live to an audience. Do not directly mention his name. ChatGPT said, it's easy to look back on the painful moments in your life and see them as detours, as if they pulled you away from where you were meant to be. But what if they weren't detours at all? What if they were doorways disguised as endings? You see, the divine has a way of hiding beginnings in what we're convinced are failures. And the more deeply something breaks you, the more likely it is that something sacred was trying to emerge from beneath the surface. We have this idea that being chosen by God means being protected from the storm. But more often than not, it means being sent into the storm. So you'll discover what couldn't be found in calm waters. The truth is, the pain didn't happen to shame you or shatter you. It happened to strip away everything that was never really you to begin with. The approval you were chasing, the false identity you wore so the world wouldn't see how unsure you felt inside. The people you clung to thinking they were home when they were only holding you back from your own awakening. And here's where it gets strange in the most beautiful way. The things that nearly broke you, they were actually shaping the very character you would need for what's coming. God didn't abandon you in those moments. He embedded something in you, a kind of depth, a stillness, a knowing. And it was only by going through the ache that you could carry the kind of compassion, resilience, and vision that can't be taught in comfort. You had to feel it all so you could hold space for others one day. That's the hidden genius of it all. Think about it. The very things you once begged God to take away are now the things that gave you your wisdom. The wounds you tried to hide have become the markers of your authority. You don't speak from theory, you speak from having been there. And because of that, people can feel you. Not the curated version, the real you. The one who's been forged in fire and still chose to love anyway. That's why you're being elevated, not because you played the game perfectly, but because you lived honestly through what was meant to destroy you. And maybe, just maybe, that heartbreak wasn't a rejection. It was a release. Maybe that failure wasn't the end of your purpose. It was the falling away of what wasn't aligned with your calling. It hurts to lose what you thought you needed. But pain has a strange way of refining your desires until only the true ones remain. And when you emerge on the other side, you find that what you really needed wasn't the thing you were reaching for. It was who you became in the reaching. There is something profoundly spiritual about collapse. Because when everything you thought you needed is taken away, you finally realize you've always had access to something deeper, a presence, a peace, a power that doesn't depend on circumstances lining up just right. It's almost as if the breaking wasn't a breakdown at all, it was a breaking open. So yes, God allowed the storm, but not to punish you, to prove you, to show you what you carry, to show you who you are when all the false layers fall away. And when you realize that nothing was wasted, that even the darkest chapters are holding light, you begin to move differently. Not with fear, but with quiet authority. Not with urgency, but with trust. Because now you see that what tried to bury you didn't know you were a seed. And it's in that very soil of sorrow, of grief, of surrender, that the roots of your becoming took hold, and what blooms from that ground. That's why you were chosen. You said expand key point 4 into a 650-word segment that flows naturally within the overall speech and aligns seamlessly with the other key points. Keep the tone conversational, avoiding any headings. Conclude with a strong, concise closing line for impact and write it as though Alan Watts himself is delivering it live to an audience. Do not directly mention his name, ChatGPT said. Isn't it curious how the louder life gets, the more difficult it becomes to hear what actually matters? The noise of expectation, the hum of comparison, the relentless inner dialogue telling you what you should be doing by now. It's almost deafening, and yet in the middle of all that chaos there's a subtle voice, so quiet it almost goes unnoticed. But that voice, that's where the divine speaks. Most of us have been taught to look for God in the spectacular, the thunderclaps, the grand revelations, the dramatic shifts that make it clear something holy has happened. But the truth is, that's rarely how it works. God doesn't usually raise his voice to match the volume of your fear. Instead, he speaks lower, so you're invited to lean in. Not because he wants to hide, but because he wants you to come closer, to tune in, to get quiet enough that you can actually feel the message, not just hear it. That nudge you ignored, the gentle inner pull you couldn't explain. The moment you paused just for a second because something felt off or something felt right, that was it. That was the whisper. That's how the sacred moves, not with force, but with invitation. And it's so easy to miss, because it won't beg for your attention. It will simply wait until you slow down enough to notice. It's tempting to think you haven't been hearing from God at all, especially when you're tired, especially when you've been waiting for a sign, a breakthrough, some undeniable proof that you're not alone. But maybe the reason you haven't heard him clearly is because he's been speaking in the language you've forgotten how to trust: intuition, peace, resonance. You were never meant to chase the sign. You were meant to become still enough to recognize it when it shows up. And here's the thing, The voice of God doesn't argue, it doesn't convince, it doesn't panic. That's how you can tell it apart from the voice of fear, which always feels urgent, loud, and unstable. Divine guidance feels simple, not always easy, but simple. It gently realigns you. It stirs something in you that feels like both remembering and revelation at once. That's why you're here now. That's why you didn't give up, even when it made no sense to keep going. Because somewhere deep within you, something new. And that knowing didn't shout, it whispered over and over again, through the quietest moments, through the tears you cried when no one was watching, through the dreams you couldn't let go of, no matter how far away they seemed. That was the voice. That was God, not outside of you, but speaking through you. And maybe that's why He chose you. Not because you had it all figured out, but because you didn't. Not because you were the strongest, but because you kept walking even when your knees were shaking. You were willing to keep listening even when all you heard was silence. You followed the feeling, the tug, the barely perceptible thread pulling you forward. That's faith. Not blind belief in some distant outcome, but a quiet agreement with the truth inside your soul. And here's the surprise, what's been guiding you was never far away. It's been in you the entire time, waiting to be trusted. And now, because you did, life is about to align in ways that won't just make sense in hindsight, will make you wonder how you ever doubted. You'll begin to see how every step, even the ones taken in confusion, were part of something beautifully orchestrated. So when it happens, when the answer reveals itself, when the moment unfolds exactly as it needs to, don't act surprised. Smile. Because deep down, you always knew. You said, expand key point 5 into a 650 word segment that flows naturally within the overall speech and aligns seamlessly with the other key points. Keep the tone conversational, avoiding any heading. Conclude with a strong, concise closing line for impact and write it as though Alan Watts himself is delivering it live to an audience. Do not directly mention his name. ChatGPT said, we spend so much of life looking outward, trying to find the thing, the opportunity, the relationship, the signal that will prove we've made it, that we're finally worthy, finally seen. And then something strange happens. You stop searching. Not because you've given up, but because something inside you begins to shift. The hunger to prove yourself fades. The anxiety quiets. And you start to realize the very thing you've been chasing was never meant to be found out there. It's been echoing from within you all along. That's the turning point. When you no longer see yourself as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone who has always been chosen, just not in the way you expected. It's not about a title or a spotlight or some divine moment of applause. It's about remembering, coming back into alignment with the truth you've buried under years of trying to be what the world told you you had to be. You see, God doesn't reveal who you're becoming. He reveals who you've always been. He peels back the layers, the masks, the projections. Not because He wants to turn you into something new, but because He wants to show you the depth of what's already there. And the wildest part is, it doesn't come with a bang. It doesn't arrive with fireworks. It happens in the most subtle, sacred way. One morning you wake up, look in the mirror, and don't see lack anymore. You see someone becoming whole. This is why it surprises you. Because what's coming isn't coming to you. It's coming from you. It's not an arrival. It's an unveiling. The person you're about to step into is not some improved version of who you were. It's the most honest version. The version that no longer needs validation. The version that no longer trades authenticity for acceptance. The version that isn't afraid of standing alone because they finally know they're never actually alone. You'll notice the shift by how you start responding to things. You won't beg anymore. You won't chase. You'll move with clarity, speak with softness, and walk into rooms not wondering if you belong, but wondering what beauty you can bring into them. Because you'll know you were never meant to fit in. You were meant to remind others what truth feels like. That's why God hid your moments so well. Because it wasn't about what others could see in you. It was about what you could finally see in yourself. You had to go through the wilderness, through the fog of confusion, through the ache of delay, not to find your worth, but to finally feel it. And now that you do, everything changes. Because once you see yourself clearly, you stop settling, you stop shrinking, you stop making yourself digestible for rooms that were never designed to hold you. You stop reaching for the thing you thought would complete you, and you start magnetizing what's already aligned with your essence. That's when the people arrive, the conversations shift, the opportunities show up, not because you forced them, but because you're finally resonating with the rhythm of your own spirit. You become the open door, the answered prayer, the living example of what it means to trust something deeper than logic. And people will ask you what changed. They'll wonder what you did differently. And you'll smile not because you figured it all out, but because you finally stopped trying to. You let go, you surrendered the plan. You got quiet enough to hear the truth whispering beneath the noise. And it said, you've always been it. So when the blessing comes, when the recognition happens, when the world finally sees what's been buried in you for years, don't let it rattle you. Let it remind you, you didn't become chosen. You simply became aware. You said expand key point 6 into a 650-word segment that flows naturally within the overall speech and aligns seamlessly with the other key points. Keep the tone conversational, avoiding any headings. Conclude with a strong, concise closing line for impact and write it as though Alan Watts himself is delivering it live to an audience. Do not directly mention his name. ChatGPT said there's a moment, quiet and almost imperceptible, when your journey stops being just about you. It happens after the healing, after the shedding, after the remembering. Not because you went looking for some noble purpose, but because something inside you just can't keep what you've learned to yourself anymore. You've been through too much, seen too deeply, felt too fully, not to let the overflow become a river that nourishes others. You see, when God chooses someone, it's never only for their benefit, it's for the ripple. It's for how their becoming will shake loose the illusions in others, how their story will reach the ones still stuck in the dark corners you used to inhabit. You didn't walk through fire so you could sit in the light alone. You walked through it so you could go back with the kind of warmth that doesn't burn, but awakens. And what's remarkable is that you won't even need to try. You won't need to convince anyone or impress them or speak in grand declarations. Your presence will carry something unspoken, something magnetic. It will whisper to others without words. You're not too far gone. You're not alone. I've been where you are. And in that recognition, people begin to soften, begin to open, begin to trust what they've been running from. You become the mirror they didn't know they needed. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. And that's what the world is starved for. People who have gone deep and returned with something true. People who don't hide their scars, but carry them as symbols of survival, as proof that it's possible to lose everything and still choose love. What you'll realize is that your becoming wasn't just about reaching some personal breakthrough. It was about becoming a living permission slip for others to do the same. And it's not that you'll save them. You don't need to. You'll simply remind them that they can save themselves. That there's a wisdom already waiting inside them, just like it was waiting inside you. So yes, God is about to prove why He chose you. But the proof won't just be in your joy or your success. It will be in the quiet moments where someone else finds their way home because of your light. It will be in the conversations that linger long after the end. It will be in the way you walk through life, no longer rushing, no longer chasing, but simply being, and in that being, creating space for others to unfold. You may never fully know the impact you have. You might not see the ripple reach the edge of the shore, but you'll feel it in the calm, in the clarity, in the way life begins to respond to you. Because when you become who you were always meant to be, the world starts to rearrange itself around that truth. And that's the part no one tells you. The real reward isn't the recognition. It isn't the applause or the affirmation. It's the realization that your becoming has become someone else's awakening. That something you said or didn't say, something you embodied without effort, became the very catalyst someone else needed to begin again. So when you step into this new season, do it with quiet confidence. Not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you finally understand you are the proof.